Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So today we're reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 9, Chapter 21, Text 7. Atanyo bokshamananasya vibhaktasya mahipate vivaktam vyabhajatasmai Risalaya harim smaran Ata thereafter, Anyaha, another guest, Bokshamanasya, who was just about to eat, Vibhaktasya, after setting aside the share for the family, Vyabhajat, he divided and distributed, Tasmai, unto him, Risalaya, unto a Sudra, Harim, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Smaran, remembering. Translation. Thereafter, having divided the remaining food with his relatives, Rantideva was just about to eat his own share when a Sudra guest arrived. Seeing the Sudra in relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, King Rantideva gave him also a share of the food. Purport by His Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada. Because King Rantideva saw everyone as part of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he never distinguished between the Brahmana and the Sudra, the poor and the rich. Such equal vision is called Samadarshana, Pandita Samadarshana. One who has actually realized that the Supreme Personality of Godhead is situated in everyone's heart, and that every living being is part of the Lord, does not make any distinction between the Brahmana and the Sudra, the poor, Daridra, and the rich, Dani. Such a person sees all living beings equally and treats them equally without discrimination. You can repeat the translation. Therefore, having divided the remaining food with his relatives, Rantideva was just about to eat his own share when a Sudra guest arrived. Seeing the Sudra in relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, King Rantideva gave him also a share of the food. Hare Krishna. Umaginatimirandasya Gyananjana Salakaya Chakshulam Militam Jaina Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha Sri Chaitanya Manobhistam Stapitam Jaina Bhutale Svayarupa Kadamayam Dadati Svapatandikam Panchakopa Turubhischa Kvipa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Sri Vasari Gaur Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So I was thinking about this verse and purport, this story for the last few days, of course in relationship to Srila Prabhupada, and I was remembering how he very much would do the same thing, distributing his prasadam. And even not just in groups, we all know Prabhupada on the Vyasasan, particularly it became a regular habit in Los Angeles. Everyone would take remnants from Srila Prabhupada. He would have his tray every day, a tray of Prabhupada cookies. That's what they were called, Prabhupada cookies. They were only made with 3 ingredients: white flour, butter, and sugar. Guess and a little water. And they were very wonderful. And of course, it started out, it was for the children. Those of you that know the history, ISKCON New Dwarka was where all the Grahastha families were. So by 1973 through 76, so many children, little infants, 1, 2, 3, 5-year-olds. So after class every day, one Mataji would make the cookies, put the plate in front of Srila Prabhupada, and then the march would start. Everybody wanted that cookie. And it wasn't just the children that wanted cookies. We also wanted Prabhupada's remnants, Prabhupada's Maha Prasadam. So as the children were taking, the adults would be looking to see how many cookies are left, to see what their opportunity is to get a Prabhupada cookie. Because we were always next in line. I got many a cookie that way, standing by the Vyasasan, waiting for my turn. You never refused. You could never get enough of Prabhupada's prasadam. And I've talked to grown-up children, now 45, 50 years old. They remember Prabhupada giving them a cookie. Even they'll say it changed their life, getting that little bit of Mahaprasadam from Prabhupada. I've told stories in the past, on the airplane in particular. We would get prasadam. Usually it was in a bag, brown paper bag, puris, little sabji, eggplant, potato, like that. Sometimes the puffed rice. So Prabhupada would sit down, and of course he would get prasadam first. And depending on what there was, if there wasn't anything else, Prabhupada would eat half of what was there. And then he would finish and say, now you can take. So he did like here, but of course he did the opposite. He took prasadam first. He took it first and then gave us his remnants. But he always made sure that everyone took prasadam. We talk about Prabhupada's rooms here. From the very beginning, always in his room, there was a jar. Here in Vrindavan, it was para, is that what you call para? Just very simple milk sweet. But no one could leave. This is Vaishnava. No one leaves the premises without prasadam. Talking may be there, may not be there. Philosophy can be there. Chanting can be there. But prasadam is always there. So, today I wanted to tell another story about Brahmananda Prabhu, Srila Prabhupada and myself. The other day when I spoke, I wanted to tell it, but I knew it was kind of a long story, so I wanted to give others an opportunity to speak. But today would be a good time. And it starts out right here in Vrindavan, Krishna Balaram Mandir, as I said at the opening that didn't happen. And I was telling Panch, I haven't lived in Vrindavan in the summertime since that time. It was very hot here. Very hot here in Vrindavan. Even Prabhupada would travel, and his travels, the summertime, he didn't come to Vrindavan. He would go to the west. But he stopped here for the opening of the temple, August 1974. But of course, it was far from ready. But then what happened is he became very ill. This was, after some years, this was his first very serious illness. It was serious to the extent that all he was eating was a piece of orange every day. He would suck the juice out of an orange. So this went on for weeks. Brahmananda was his secretary. I was the servant. So the secretary's room at that time was the front entrance. That was where Brahmananda stayed as a secretary. And I stayed in the room right behind the sitting room now, which has all the cabinets in there. That was the servants' quarters. So in that way, we surrounded Prabhupada in his room. He was in the sitting room. And being ill, he was also in that bed, lying, sitting. This went on for weeks. So after his recovery, then I also got very sick. Then I recovered. So finally, Prabhupada left Vrindavan, and he was going to go to Mayapur, spend some time in Mayapur. So he stopped in Delhi, just for the day. But when he was in Delhi, this one Indian man came and told Prabhupada there was this big festival going on in Kurukshetra. And they were inviting all these swamis, yogis, were all going. And their idea was they wanted to create unity amongst all the Hindus, all the Hindu religions, and wanted to build a temple with all of them, a temple for everyone in Kurukshetra. So Prabhupada was just recovering, and Brahmananda was there, other devotees, sannyasis were there in the room, and he was saying, I don't think I can do it, he said. He said, the ride is a long ride in the car. He said, and I've just been ill. He said, my strength. And he's looking at the devotees, and of course they're all shaking their heads, agreeing with Prabhupada, you shouldn't do it. And then as the conversation went on, he started to think, well, maybe it could happen. He said, it's just 3 hours, he said, to Kurukshetra. He said, we can go early in the morning when it's still cool out. Remember, it's September, so it's hot. He said, we can go early in the morning when it's cool. He said, so maybe we can do. And then he looked at Brahmananda and the other sannyasis, Tamal Krishna, Bhavananda, and he said, so anyway, he said, you discuss it. He said, and later on, he said, you can tell me what your decision is. So they became very excited. Prabhupada included them in making a decision. So that was 11 o'clock in the morning. So then Prabhupada's time for massage. So now this is another time. I'm massaging him, I'm massaging his back. And he goes, so Sut Krita, what is your opinion? Should I go to Kurukshetra? So this wasn't the first time he asked me such a question. And this was 75. I've been with Prabhupada for 2 years. Prabhupada never said no to a preaching opportunity. So when he asked me, I just smiled, chuckled, and I said, well, Prabhupada, I said, I think you're going to go. I would never tell him my answer. I would tell him his answer. I said, I think you're going to do it because it's an opportunity to preach. And they would say, you have good understanding. This was Prabhupada. Never give up an opportunity to do some service. So he had his lunch, he had his nap, rings the bell, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, he said, call them. So they all come into the room and sit down, and Prabhupada looks, he said, so what have you decided? And Prabhupada, you should stay here and rest. He just shook his head. Dying, Prabhupada would be speaking. He did it here at that time in 74. He went out to meet the ministers, the politicians who would help bring the cement. I had to carry him out to sit him down there on the Vyasa. And then he spoke for 20 minutes like everything was fine. And then I put my arms under and carried him back into his room. So I knew he wasn't going to miss this opportunity, even though it was, Prabhupada said, a hodgepodge hodgepodge events, all these so-called sadhus. So then we go to Kurukshetra the next morning, just like this. It was very hot. We drove there. We get there. The host who was there took Prabhupada around. There were a few temples in the area. Then they took him to a guest house they had for Prabhupada. So Prabhupada had his room. Myself and Brahmananda stayed in the front room. So then Prabhupada had lunch. So it was very, very hot. It's like 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Brahmananda and I, when we were driving in, we saw a nice irrigation canal, concrete, V-shape, with the water coming for the crops there in Kurukshetra area, all farms. So this water was clear, it looked beautiful and cool, and it was flowing very fast through the canal. So we decided to go for a swim. That's how hot it was. So we left Prabhupada's room, we take a walk, couple-minute walk, and we're seeing this water we didn't even think this is going really fast. We just thought it's really hot. So the two of us jump in, Brahmananda Maharaj, then I jump in, and we're swimming in place trying to stay in the same spot. But we couldn't. That's how fast this water was moving. So all of a sudden we're floating down this waterway, and the sides are very smooth concrete, done very nicely. It wasn't jagged, it was smooth. So we're both grasping at the sides of this canal trying to get out. But water is just pushing us further and further down. So finally there was some cord coming down that I grabbed a hold of. And I looked a few feet up, and Brahmananda grabbed a hold of a tree branch. So he's hanging on there, and the water just spinning around and holding. And I'm hanging on to this wire and spinning, and I was like this. I was like, 60 kgs. I was light. So I grabbed the wire, and I just pulled with difficulty. I pulled myself out of the water. And then, of course, Brahmananda is screaming my name, Sut Krita, Sut Krita. So I'm right in front of him. He's in the water and holding on to this branch and is pounding him. And he said, pull me out. And I looked at him. Brahmananda was maybe 130, 150 kgs. And I'm looking at him saying, he can't pull himself out because of his weight. But he's asking me to pull him out. So I looked and I thought, not a good idea, not a good plan. And of course he's very much panicked. And I told him, wait there for a minute, and he's holding on, screaming. And I walked down, I went down 20, 30, 40 feet. And this water, in order to slow it down, it went so fast, they had these concrete things coming up out of the water, just concrete ballast. 3 rows of them, 4 rows of them. So that would slow the water down. But it also looked very deadly. If he was to let go, he just ram into those. But right in front of it, there was stairs leading out. There was just 4 stairs leading out of this canal. So I ran back up to him, and after a conversation of a minute or two, he didn't want to let go, and I told him, you have to let go. I said, I'll go to the end and catch you. When I get to the end, you let go. And I said, I'll be there. So when he realized I wasn't going to try to pull him out, something inside told me not a good idea. So I walked to that edge, and I'm on the stairs, and I'm looking at him, and I said, okay, let go, I'm here. So he let go, and I see that huge body, Brahmananda, just coming down. He's got his arms out, and he's just coming right at me. And somehow or other, by Krishna's arrangement, I grabbed him, stopped him, and we both walked up the steps. And we started walking back to Prabhupada's room. And we walk a few steps, and Brahmananda looks at me. He said, I didn't think of Krishna once. And then we walked a little more, and I said, I'm still not thinking about Krishna. We almost drowned. So then we walked back, sitting down. Prabhupada rings the bell. Prabhupada always rings the bell. Rings the bell, we go in, we offer obeisances, and he looks at us. He said, where were you? We said, oh, Prabhupada, we went for a swim in the canal. He said, did you have a good time? We said, oh yes, Prabhupada. Didn't say anything to him. Didn't have to, he already knew what happened. So that was the afternoon. So later in the day was the big meeting, Kurukshetra, right in Kurukshetra. And there were all these sadhus, yogis, matted hair, beards, bright orange cloth. And Prabhupada, they gave a nice place to sit. And his two disciples, Brahmananda and I, are sitting on either side of him. But they didn't want him to speak because they knew, like his Guru Maharaj, they knew what would happen if he spoke. He was going to just blast everyone. So the plan was for him to be there because he was world famous. World famous, brought Vedic culture all over the world. You know, that's how they saw Prabhupada. He brought the Vedic culture around the world. He made India important. So they wanted him. So he's sitting there. One man speaks, one yogi, one Swami, and of course they're all speaking in Hindi. And then another one gets up and speaks, and Prabhupada, you could see Prabhupada, and he's in his seat, and he did something I only saw him do twice. He started shaking his leg. He's sitting in the chair, and he's shaking. The only other time I saw him do that was when he was with Cardinal Danielot in France, when this cardinal was speaking all kinds of nonsense, and Prabhupada would wait for his turn to speak, and while he's waiting, his leg is shaking. So here his leg is shaking, and the more it shakes, you know, the more upset Prabhupada is, because he's listening to these nonsense people speak. So then one person stopped, and Prabhupada just got up, and he went to the podium, and he started speaking. So he spoke just for 5 or 10 minutes. And of course we could understand some of what he was saying, quoting Bhagavad-Gita. In Kurukshetra, what else is he going to do? He just quoted Bhagavad-Gita, one verse after another, you know, Aham sarvasya prabhavo, tesham satata yuktanam, sarvadharman parityaja. One after another he's quoting. We don't understand everything, Brahmananda and I, but we can see, and Prabhupada's furious. He's just lashing out at everyone in this assembly. So then he finished speaking. He walks back to the spot. He looks at us. He said, come on, we're leaving. That was it. It was done. So then we get into the car. Brahmananda's in the front seat next to the driver. I'm in the back seat with Prabhupada. So we start driving, and it starts raining. And Prabhupada said, so? He said, did you understand? And we said, well, Prabhupada, we could understand some of what you're saying, yes. He said, yeah, I told him, you'll never be successful in this endeavor. He said, I told them, you're here in Kurukshetra where Krishna spoke Bhagavad-Gita. No one has even mentioned Krishna. He says, all your plans will be a failure because you haven't brought Krishna in. So he went on and on saying this is what he told them all. And this is what happened. They were there in Kurukshetra, all these impersonalists, Mayavadis speaking their nonsense, talking about unity. Prabhupada said, you'll never have unity, he said. So in the car, he was, again, giving the lecture to us in the car, saying what he said. And as we're driving in the car, rain starts coming down harder and harder. And the wind, so it was like, just like last week here, it was like a mini cyclone. trees were coming down as we're driving back from Kurukshetra to get back to Delhi after Prabhupada finished. The whole Pandal blew down. So this was Prabhupada. This was Prabhupada's efforts there. But never refused an opportunity. If he could speak, like he would say, if he could change even one person would listen, he said it would be successful. So the prasadam, so that was my encounter with Brahmananda. I mentioned the other day how we were here together for several months. And Brahmananda, as he was at that front door of Prabhupada's rooms, he would stay there. He didn't go many places when he was Prabhupada's servant. He would be right there with Prabhupada. That's what he did. I told you when Prabhupada was ill, he was shocked that when I had to pick Prabhupada up, he wasn't there. It's how he saw himself, always with Prabhupada. Would do anything for Prabhupada. In Mayapur, Prabhupada was very specific about everything he wanted. If you were his servant, you were his secretary, you always had to know Prabhupada's desires. If you did something that he didn't like, he'd let you know very quickly. And with Brahmananda one day I was in the room, I don't even know what he had done, but he made some plan, some arrangement that Prabhupada didn't tell him to do. And a bell rings, I go in, Prabhupada said, get Brahmananda. So I go back, get Brahmananda. Of course I go in with Brahmananda. And Prabhupada looks at him. Brahmananda's sitting there. And Prabhupada said, you don't move a pin from here to here on my desk without asking me. Yes, Prabhupada. So that was being with Prabhupada. I know people have read my book, and they'll tell me sometimes, they'll say, I couldn't have done that. I'm not sure specifically what they say, but with Prabhupada, you had to be very surrendered. We knew our position as his servant. Whatever his desire was, that's what you did. Nothing outside of that. Another devotee was his secretary. I told you there was a secretary of the month after Shyama-Sundar left. So we had Bhagavan, Hansaduta, Rupanuga, Jagadish, Brahmananda. They all were secretary for a month. And it takes at least that long even to understand Prabhupada's mood. Just like he said to me, what should I do? Should I stay or should I preach? I understood. Not anything wasn't a big realization. It was just seeing Prabhupada every day, always accepting service, always preaching. So you just know it. But it takes time to know Prabhupada's desires. So one devotee, he accepted an invitation to go to a life member's house for lunch without asking Prabhupada. And Prabhupada rang the bell, said, get Jagadish. So I went and got Jagadish, and we sat down, and Prabhupada looked at him. He said, who has told you to accept this invitation? Jagadish looked back at Prabhupada. Couldn't say anything. Actually, it was me. Me that suggested it. Me who was with Prabhupada for over a year. Jagadish didn't know. So he asked me my advice. I said, yeah, I think it was okay. So he did it based on that. So now Prabhupada's looking at Jagadish and saying, who has told you? Jagadish didn't give me up. Prabhupada blasted him. blasted him for doing it without asking his permission, to do anything without my permission. He was crying, Jagadish was crying. I understood right then, Prabhupada knew it was me. He knew it was me. He also knew he couldn't chastise me the same way he chastised his surrendered devotees. I would just break down. So he chastised him. They say that in India you have the uncle, use the uncle, you don't use the parents to do your heavy chastisement. So this was that opportunity. But I learned a lesson also when you're with Prabhupada. You can have no other desires than to understand his desire. We could stop here if there are any questions. Prabhu.
Sometimes they may consider that like a slave mentality. You just have to, you can't think for yourself. What happened to our independent thinking and our ability to make conscious, good decisions? It's almost a little bit like repression of some sort. So how do you keep your mind from feeling a little bit anger or maybe resentful that I'm being controlled to the max?
Yes. That's why Prabhupada had 12 servants and numerous secretaries and a few Sanskrit editors that left. Because Prabhupada he didn't often do it, but he would do it so that you knew. Your choices were very limited. But he was always open to suggestions. He did things by devotee suggestions. At times, it would go in the room and say there were different opportunities. It wasn't like he would shut things down. It's just that there was a very clear understanding that his word was final. And I can't speak. I have seen others in different situations with Prabhupada where false ego entered the situation and they found it very difficult to be with him. Mine is very strong. Myself, I became Prabhupada's servant from being nobody in New Vrindavan, so it wasn't like wasn't a temple president, wasn't a big book distributor, I wasn't a GBC, I wasn't anything, so I never had that kind of a feeling. I've always been a subordinate, that's what I've always done. I'm comfortable with that. But I've seen others battle themselves with Srila Prabhupada. And what is the cure? The cure is chanting and following the program and getting smashed enough to realize that you aren't anything other than insignificant. That was just like the story here. And just like Srila Prabhupada, they realize when you're Krishna's servant, right? He sees, the description is, he sees everybody, the Sudra, the Brahmin, everyone in the same position. So that's the devotee. So the more we come to that platform, then the easier it is to realize I'm servant of the servant of the servant. Prabhupada always expressed with his leaders, he made it an effort to have leaders stay with him. He made it part of his, the secretaries, that's why they did Secretary of the Month. They were all GBCs. He wanted the GBCs to see how I do things. Because it's more than just reading the books. That's what we say, right? You can read the books, but if you're going to get a degree in something, you've got to go through the guru, the teacher, the instructor. You've got to pass the course. So I saw that, in some ways with Prabhupada. Everybody's reading the books, everybody's chanting, But to see how Prabhupada acted in every situation, it was very enlightening, to see how he handled things, to see. And he did it multiple times, asking people, should I go to this program or should I rest? And they always told him to rest. And he always got upset that they didn't understand Krishna consciousness as he was giving it to us. We can look at these videos. I haven't watched it, even the final lesson. I watched a minute of it and I just don't want to. The final, Prabhupada's final lesson video, I never get to the end of it. Haven't even looked for a long time. But what is he doing? He's still preaching. As he's taking his last breath, he's preaching. He wanted us to become like him as much as possible. That's what he wanted. And his leaders, if he saw, it's like I say with Siddhaswarup, Ananda Goswami, who Prabhupada gave sannyas, had big following, hundreds of followers. So Prabhupada said, you travel with me. He had him travel with him for months, just so he could understand what Prabhupada did, how he walked, how he preached, what he preached, all these things. Because he knew he had so many followers. And he did it with others. He would say, what would he say? Travel with me. If you're having a problem, come stay with me. Not just because you'll just be with him, because you'll understand what Krishna consciousness is. When you're with him, you get an idea. Krishna consciousness. It's every moment, all the time. So, managers, people that manage often in any company, any corporation, people that gravitate, they want to manage. So we have that also in ISKCON. So it's important to understand it's not ordinary mundane management. You chastise one leader, temple president, somebody said he's not chanting his rounds. And Prabhupada said, well, it doesn't matter how good he is. If he's not chanting his rounds, he said it's all useless. He can't manage, it's not material, he said. But then they said the same thing about another temple president, and Prabhupada said, he's a very good manager. So Prabhupada judged everything individually, as that's what we need to do as well. Everything, it's not one size fits all. You learn that in Ayurveda. Everyone's different. The whole Western mentality is everyone is the same. You give them the same education, the same medicine, everything the same, even though there's so many varieties. But Vedic life, we understand so many varieties are there. But all the examples are there for those that are managing what the qualification is. That's described all so much in the 4th canto, qualifications of a good leader. So we have to strive to lead like Prabhupada led. Yesterday I gave a class, Saturday, Sunday I give Russian class, and I was saying everything initially, the whole society started based on Prabhupada's love. That's what everything came from. And everyone was convinced to serve this person because he cared. He cared. So then they trusted. We trusted Prabhupada. And he never spoiled that trust. He was always there. Someone asked me the question, did Prabhupada take anyone back? He would take anyone back, even those that twisted the philosophy when they left. If they would just come back and apologize and reform, Prabhupada would take them back. So this is, we know the story when they said, how often, was Tamal Krishna said, how many times are you going to forgive this person? Prabhupada said, never stop forgiving. Otherwise our whole philosophy is finished. That's Vaishnavism. That's all we have is service. Something happens, Prabhupada would give more service. He never rejected. He never felt rejected by Prabhupada. It's not easy. Nowadays we see everything. We're learning new ways, how to associate, how to keep enlivened, chanting, reading Prabhupada's books. When I was with him, I'm embarrassed to say some of the things Prabhupada said to me. When I was with him in Australia and Prabhupada looked at me, he said, if you carefully read Srimad Bhagavatam, he said, how long will it take you to complete? He said, how much time do you need to spend on each verse? So he asked me that. How much time? He said. Looking back, why you say that to me? I'm thinking I could have said at least spend a day, the entire day, a week. I said 15 minutes. I said 15 minutes on a verse. And he said, okay. So at that rate, he said, how long will it take you to finish the Bhagavatam? So then we calculated. But he wanted to understand. When I first joined him, and that's what he said this, when I first joined him, he said, every day you read Bhagavatam for 15 minutes. He said, then ask me any questions you like. Imagine the facility he gave me. Then years later, he's asking me about my reading because I'm not reading. I'm not asking him any questions. I'm not reading his books, sitting at his class every day, but I'm not reading. But this is what he wanted us. He wanted us to go inside, more and more go inside, to understand what it means to be Krishna conscious. He showed us, his example is there for 10 years every day, what he did, everything he did, every step. I always say on the morning walk, everyone stumbled on the morning walk except Prabhupada. Every time he would stop, everybody would fall over themselves, or they would trip along the walk. But he always, everything was careful. Everything he did, every move he made, it just looked perfect. So he wanted us to become like that, become thoughtful, and do the best for everyone in every circumstance. Even if it was just handing a cookie to a 2-year-old, then they put out their other hand. You put a cookie in the other hand. And then the mother's holding the child. They were so delighted. This is how Prabhupada grabbed all of us. It was by his person. It was personal. We say everything is personal. Prabhupada was the person that no one could resist. Any other questions? Okay. Would you like to say something else? No. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Hare Krishna. Thank you very much.